7 stroke, warning signs in women, spot early, stay alive. I still remember the day Rita walked into my clinic in Memphis. She's 66, a retired elementary school teacher, and one of those people who always has a smile ready for everyone. But that morning, her daughter had brought her in, worried. "Mom's been acting strange," she whispered as Rita sat down beside her. "She says she feels fine, but her words don't come out right sometimes, and yesterday she dropped her coffee mug without realizing it." Rita looked at me, her soft blue eyes calm, unaware of the storm quietly building inside her body. I noticed the slight droop on the left side of her smile, so subtle you might mistake it for tiredness. When I asked her to raise both arms, her right one lifted slowly, confidently, but her left wavered and sank halfway. That was the moment I knew something dangerous might be happening, something that couldn't wait. I explained gently, like I always do with patients I've known for years. "Rita, your body is whispering right now. These tiny changes, your smile, your arm, your words, they may seem small, but they're signs we cannot ignore." Her daughter's hand gripped hers tightly. There was a silence in the room, heavy and fragile, the kind of silence where every second feels like it matters. We ran a few tests and my suspicion was confirmed. Rita had experienced what we call a mini stroke. It's a warning from the body, a soft knock before the storm, and it saved her life that day. Because she came in early, we had time to act. But as I looked at Rita, I couldn't help thinking about how many women her age would have brushed off these signs. How many would have thought, "Oh, it's just fatigue," or "I'm just clumsy today." Later, when I visited Rita in her recovery room, she told me something that stayed with me. "Doctor, I never thought stroke could happen to someone like me. I don't smoke, I eat my greens, I walk every morning. I thought I was safe." And I understood. So many women believe the same thing, that strokes are sudden, obvious, and always dramatic. But they aren't. Sometimes they creep in quietly, hidden behind headaches, blurred vision, dizziness, or simple forgetfulness. That's why I started making these videos, not to frighten you, but to give you the knowledge Rita wishes she'd had sooner. Because when you know what to look for, you can change everything. You can spot the danger early, you can give yourself and the people you love the gift of more time. Rita recovered, and now she spends her mornings in the little garden behind her house, tending to her roses, walking without fear. But she still tells her friends, her neighbors, and anyone who will listen, "Please don't ignore the whispers from your body." I want you to remember her story as we go through the subtle, often overlooked warning signs women experience. This isn't just information, it's a chance to protect your health, your independence, and your future. And I promise by the end of this video, you'll see what Rita now knows. When your body speaks, you must listen. Because sometimes just paying attention, one moment sooner, can save your life. Rita always started her mornings the same way. At 6:30, she'd sit by the window of her small Memphis kitchen, sipping her warm cup of chamomile tea, while the early light painted the walls in soft gold. The neighborhood outside was quiet, just the rustle of oak leaves and the distant sound of someone's sprinkler ticking rhythmically. Life felt steady, predictable, and safe. That morning, though, something felt different. She reached for her teacup and realized her right hand trembled ever so slightly. It wasn't dramatic, just a faint, fluttering shake, the kind most people would ignore. She frowned, flexed her fingers, and whispered to herself, "Maybe I slept on it wrong." There was no pain, just a strange weakness she couldn't quite explain. Within seconds, the sensation faded, and she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Almost. Later that day, her daughter Emily called to check in, as she often did. "Mom, you sound funny," Emily said after a few minutes of chatting. "Are you okay?" Rita laughed softly, brushing it off. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired. Must be the weather." But after they hung up, she replayed the conversation in her head and realized Emily was right. Her words had felt heavy on her tongue, slightly slurred as if her thoughts and speech were no longer moving at the same pace. That night, Rita stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at herself carefully for the first time in months. There it was, a tiny droop on the left corner of her smile, almost imperceptible unless you knew what to look for. But she didn't. Like so many women her age, Rita had always thought strokes were sudden, obvious, and violent. She believed there'd be crushing headaches, collapsing on the floor, maybe even loss of consciousness. No one had ever told her the truth, that the earliest signs could whisper, not shout. The next morning, she decided to visit her longtime doctor, Dr. Mason. He was in his early 60s, gentle-eyed, and had treated Rita for over 2 decades. When she described her symptoms, the slight hand tremor, the slurred words, the faint smile droop, he didn't dismiss them. Instead, his face grew serious, though his voice stayed calm. "Rita," he said softly, resting a hand over hers, "your body's trying to speak to you. Sometimes it starts small. A tingling here, a stumble there, a word that won't come out right. Most women ignore these signs because they seem harmless, but they're not." Her throat tightened. "You think it could be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. He nodded gently. "I think we need to run a few tests. No panic, but no waiting either." Sitting there in his office, Rita thought about how many of her friends would have dismissed what she felt, attributing it to aging, fatigue, or even clumsiness. She remembered her neighbor Carol, who'd once complained about sudden dizziness only to discover months later that she'd suffered a small, undetected stroke. Carol's recovery had been long and painful. Rita whispered, almost to herself, "I thought I'd know if something was wrong." Dr. Mason squeezed her hand. "That's what almost everyone thinks, but women's strokes don't always look like men's. They're quieter, more subtle, and that's why they're so dangerous." By the time Rita left the clinic, she felt strangely unsettled. The air outside was still warm and sweet with magnolia blossoms, but everything around her seemed sharper, louder, as if the world was leaning closer, urging her to pay attention. She drove home slowly, hands tight on the steering wheel, replaying every strange moment she'd brushed aside, the slight tremor, the clumsy mug drop, the heavy words. That evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Emily called again, worry lacing her voice. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" This time, Rita didn't brush it off. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," she admitted softly, "but I'm listening now." And for the first time in years, she felt the weight of something she'd never considered before, the fragility of her own body, the quiet ways it asks for help. The following weekend, Rita hosted her usual Sunday brunch for Emily and her grandson Noah. It was one of her favorite rituals, fresh biscuits, strawberry jam, and the soft chatter of family filling her small Memphis kitchen. But that morning, as she stood at the counter slicing peaches, something strange happened. The knife slipped from her hand. It wasn't clumsy, it wasn't careless. Her grip simply vanished as though her fingers had forgotten what they were supposed to do. The peach rolled to the floor, the knife clattered against the counter, and Rita froze. Emily rushed over instantly. "Mom, did you cut yourself?" Rita shook her head, forcing a small smile to hide the unease prickling beneath her skin. "I'm fine," she lied softly, bending to pick up the fruit. "I guess my hand just slipped." Emily hesitated, frowning, but let it go. Rita, too, brushed it aside, convincing herself it was nothing. She told herself she was tired from waking up too early, or maybe she'd forgotten to drink enough water. That little moment, a dropped knife, didn't feel like danger, but later she would realize it had been the second whisper from her body, the quiet signal she ignored. After brunch, Rita went to the backyard with Noah. He tugged her hand excitedly, pulling her toward the swing set. But when she stood up from the porch, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The ground seemed to tilt, as though someone had shifted the world beneath her feet. She steadied herself against the railing and forced a laugh when Noah turned around with his curious, wide-eyed stare. "Grandma's just a little dizzy, honey," she reassured him, even though her voice shook. Later that night, after Emily and Noah left, Rita sat alone in her living room, the television murmuring softly in the background. She rubbed her left hand absent-mindedly, testing her grip on the armrest. Something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't normal, that the tremor, the slurred words, the drooping smile, and now the sudden dizziness were connected. But she still hesitated, afraid of what it might mean. It was close to midnight when her phone rang. It was Carol, her neighbor and old friend, calling to check in. When Rita mentioned the dizziness, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Rita," Carol said finally, her voice low and serious, "do you remember last year when I had my stroke? It started the same way. I felt dizzy for a week and thought it was just dehydration. One morning I woke up and couldn't move my right arm. Don't wait like I did." The words settled heavily on Rita's chest, and for the first time, she felt a quiet fear rise inside her. Carol's life had changed overnight after her stroke. Months of therapy, learning to hold a spoon again, struggling to say her grandson's name without stuttering. Rita remembered sitting by her bedside, holding her hand and thinking, "I can't imagine going through this," but now, here she was, on the edge of the same path. The next morning, Rita woke with a dull, throbbing headache. It wasn't unbearable, but it was different, sharp, unfamiliar, pulsing behind her right eye. She stood slowly, testing her balance, and decided she couldn't ignore the signs anymore. She called Dr. Mason's office. He made room to see her that afternoon. When she walked into his office, he noticed immediately how pale she looked. She explained what had happened: the dropped knife, the dizziness, the headache, her voice soft as though saying it out loud might make it more real. Dr. Mason listened quietly, then leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Rita, I want you to understand something important. A single overlooked symptom, one moment when the brain doesn't get enough blood, oxygen, or rest, can change everything. It's like missing the first crack in a dam. You may not see the water yet, but when it comes fast." Her chest tightened as she looked down at her hands, resting on her lap. "So you think I'm close?" "I think your body is trying to protect you by sending these warnings," he said gently. "We have a chance to act now before something permanent happens, but we can't wait." For the first time since that morning in the kitchen, Rita didn't argue. She didn't brush it aside or call it clumsiness or fatigue. She nodded, swallowing hard, and whispered, "All right, let's do whatever we need to." That evening, when Emily called, Rita told her everything about the dizziness, the headache, the tests Dr. Mason wanted to run. Emily's voice trembled, caught between fear and relief. "Mom, thank you for telling me. We'll figure this out together." And for the first time in days, Rita didn't feel so alone. But deep down, she couldn't shake the thought. What if she had ignored it again? What if she had waited like Carol? One overlooked symptom, and her life, her independence, her mornings in the kitchen with chamomile tea, all of it could have vanished in an instant. That night, Rita whispered a quiet promise to herself. She wouldn't ignore the whispers anymore. It was early Tuesday morning when Rita first noticed how heavy her left arm felt. She was standing by the kitchen counter, buttering a slice of toast, when the knife slipped again, this time without warning. Her fingers wouldn't grip properly, and the toast fell to the floor, scattering crumbs across the tile. She stared at her hand, flexing it slowly. It didn't feel numb, just strange, like it no longer belonged to her. There was no pain, but the weakness was unsettling. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm, and told herself it would pass, like before, but it didn't. By mid-morning, the weakness had spread slightly up her arm. She sat on the living room couch, cradling her hand in her lap, when Emily dropped by unannounced. "Mom, I was in the area," she said, smiling, but her expression quickly shifted when she saw Rita's pale face. "Mom, what's wrong?" Rita hesitated, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's nothing, sweetheart. My hand just feels a little weak, that's all." Emily sat beside her, eyes narrowing. "A little weak? Mom, you look exhausted." She reached for Rita's hand and noticed how her mother's fingers trembled when she tried to squeeze back. In that quiet moment, Emily felt her stomach twist with worry. She remembered Carol's warning, the dizziness, the headaches, the subtle slurring from their last call. "We're going to the hospital," Emily said firmly, reaching for her bag. Rita shook her head, forcing a smile to calm her daughter. No. Dr. Mason said we'd run some tests next week. I'm okay to wait." But Emily's voice sharpened, more serious than Rita had ever heard. "Mom, we're not waiting. You're coming with me, now." At the hospital, Dr. Mason met them in the emergency department. He had already been alerted about her symptoms and ushered them quickly into an exam room. As he tested Rita's grip strength and reflexes, his brow furrowed slightly, though his voice stayed calm. "Rita, we're seeing early signs of weakness on your left side," he explained softly. "This tells me we're running out of time. I want to get you into imaging immediately." Rita nodded, silent now. The room felt suddenly too bright, too sterile, as though the walls themselves were leaning closer. Emily sat beside her, clutching her mother's hand tightly, her thumb brushing small circles against her knuckles. While waiting for the scan, Rita stared at the ceiling, her thoughts tumbling like loose stones. How had she missed this? How had she convinced herself that these whispers and the tremor, the dizziness, the heaviness were nothing? A sudden heaviness settled in her chest, not just from fear, but from realization. Dr. Mason returned after the scan, pulling up a chair so he could sit close. His tone was warm, steady, the way you'd speak to family, but there was no hiding the seriousness in his eyes. "Rita," he began, "the good news is you haven't had a major stroke yet, but what you're experiencing are called transient ischemic attacks, TIAs. They're like little warnings from your brain. Think of them as sparks before a fire. Emily squeezed Rita's hand tighter, her breath catching. So we caught it in time? Dr. Mason nodded slowly. Yes, but only because you came today. If you'd waited, even one more episode could have left lasting damage. The words sank in like stones into water, rippling through Rita's thoughts. One more ignored sign, and her life could have changed forever. She pictured herself struggling to walk, holding onto rails just to move across the room. She imagined not being able to hold Noah's hand, not being able to tell him bedtime stories. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. I understand now, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't ignore my body anymore. Dr. Mason smiled softly. That's the promise I want you to make, not just to me, but to yourself. When your body speaks, listen. Weakness, dizziness, confusion, these aren't inconveniences, Rita, they're alarms. Later that evening, back at home, Emily stayed with her, making tea while Rita rested on the couch. The warm light from the lamp washed over the room, softening the edges of an exhausting day. Mom, Emily said quietly, handing her a mug, I'm proud of you for going today. Rita smiled faintly, her left hand still a little unsteady as she wrapped it around the cup. I almost didn't, she admitted. I almost waited. Emily sat beside her, eyes glossy but steady. I know, but you didn't. And that makes all the difference. Rita nodded, glancing toward the window where the Memphis evening glimmered faintly outside. Somewhere deep inside, past the fear and uncertainty, a quiet strength began to rise. She had faced the whispering signs and chosen to act. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. The following Thursday started like any other. The August sun spilled gently through Rita's curtains, and she sat by the window with her chamomile tea, trying to enjoy the calm of the Memphis morning. But beneath the quiet, something inside her felt different, fragile, almost unsettled. Emily had spent the night at her house just to be safe, as she'd insisted. Rita smiled at her daughter's concern, though she still felt a stubborn pride lingering. After all, she'd been independent her whole life. She cooked her own meals, kept her little garden alive, and cared for Noah whenever Emily had long shifts at work. But that morning, as she tried to read a recipe on her tablet, the letters on the screen seemed to blur and shift slightly, almost as if they were dancing out of focus. Mom, Emily called from the kitchen. Want some toast? Rita looked up, opening her mouth to reply, but the words didn't come out right. They stumbled, broken, and twisted, as though her tongue no longer belonged to her. McKay, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily froze, turning toward her mother immediately. What did you just say? Rita blinked, confused. McKay, toast. But even she heard how wrong it sounded, how strange and heavy her voice was. She touched her lips instinctively, panic crawling up her throat. Emily rushed to her side, crouching in front of her. Mom, can you look at me? Rita met her daughter's gaze, but there was something cloudy in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty. Emily's stomach clenched. She remembered Dr. Mason's warning about slurred speech, how it could be one of the clearest alarms of an impending stroke. I'm calling 911, Emily said firmly, reaching for her phone. Rita shook her head weakly, her hand trembling. No, don't. I'm fine, she whispered, her words still warped. No, Mom, Emily insisted, tears brimming in her eyes. This isn't fine. I'm not losing you because you're trying to be strong. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, their calm voices and brisk movements filling the house. Rita's heart pounded as one of them shined a small light into her eyes, testing her reactions. Another asked her to repeat a simple sentence, but the words tangled in her throat, refusing to come out cleanly. On the ride to the hospital, Rita stared out the window, Memphis flashing by in a blur of sunlight and shadow. A strange mix of fear and disbelief swirled inside her. She thought about Carol's warning, about Dr. Mason's gentle voice explaining how little sparks could lead to fire. But now, sitting in the back of the ambulance, she understood what that really meant. This wasn't a whisper anymore, this was her body shouting. At the hospital, Dr. Mason met them again, his face composed, but his eyes carrying a weight of urgency. He led them quickly into an exam room, and Emily clung to Rita's hand as though holding on could keep her anchored. Rita, Dr. Mason said softly, crouching slightly to meet her gaze, you're experiencing more significant symptoms now, confusion and slurred speech. That's our red alert. Her eyes filled with tears, frustration tightening her chest. But I thought, I was careful, she murmured, her voice slow and uneven. I know you have been, he said gently, resting his hand on hers. But sometimes, even when we do everything right, the brain sends signals we can't ignore. Right now, our priority is to protect you, and that means acting fast. He explained they'd administer clot-busting medication if needed and monitor her closely. Emily stood by, silent but steady, brushing a strand of hair from her mother's forehead. The weight of the moment hung heavy between them. As they waited for the tests, Rita stared at her daughter's worried face, her thoughts hazy but piercingly clear in one way. She had almost waited too long. One more hesitation, one more, I'm fine, and everything, her independence, her laughter, her morning teas, her garden, Noah's small hand in hers, could have been stolen from her forever. Later that night, Rita was resting in a quiet hospital room, hooked up to monitors, the rhythmic beeping a strange comfort. Emily sat curled in the chair beside her, head resting on folded arms. Rita reached out with her steadier hand, brushing her daughter's fingers softly. I'm sorry, she whispered, her words still slow but clearer now. Emily stirred, opening her eyes, her voice breaking. Don't be sorry, Mom. You're here. That's what matters. In the dim light, Rita finally let her guard down. She understood, maybe for the first time in her life, how fragile time could be, how one small decision, one ignored symptom could alter everything. And as she drifted into a light sleep, she promised herself one thing. From this moment forward, she wouldn't minimize her body's warnings. No more second guessing, no more I'm fine, because when confusion and slurred speech arrive, there are no second chances. The day after her hospital visit, Rita returned home, relieved to be back in her own space, surrounded by familiar walls and the soft hum of her little Memphis neighborhood. Emily insisted on staying with her, just for a few days, though Rita knew her daughter wouldn't leave until she was certain everything was safe. For the first time in a long while, Rita slowed down. She sat by the living room window, watching the branches sway gently in the breeze, letting herself breathe. The weight of what had happened, the ambulance, the slurred words, the fear in Emily's voice, still sat heavy in her chest, but she tried to focus on small comforts. That afternoon, she picked up the book she'd been reading for weeks, determined to get lost in its pages. But when she glanced down, something felt wrong. The letters on the page blurred together, swimming in and out of focus. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, and tried again, but the words seemed to scatter and double, as if her vision were playing tricks on her. Emily, she called softly, her voice unsteady. Her daughter came rushing in. What is it, Mom? These words, Rita whispered, pointing to the page. They're moving. I can't make them stay still. Emily crouched beside her, concern clouding her face. Is it your glasses? Maybe they're dirty. No, Rita interrupted, shaking her head. It's not my glasses, it's my eyes. Emily stared at her, and Rita saw the recognition in her daughter's expression. The memory of Dr. Mason's warnings, the pamphlets they'd skimmed in the hospital, the lists of signs she had promised herself she'd never ignore again. Emily squeezed her hand. Mom, we're calling Dr. Mason. When they arrived at the clinic later that afternoon, Dr. Mason greeted them gently but wasted no time. He sat across from Rita, listening carefully as she described what she saw. Blurred edges, doubled words, sudden shifting shadows. He leaned forward, his voice soft but deliberate. Rita, what you're experiencing isn't uncommon. When parts of the brain responsible for processing vision don't get enough oxygen, even for just a moment, the signals can misfire. It can make the world seem distorted or doubled. It's another warning sign. Rita swallowed hard, her fingers knotting together in her lap. So this is part of it? He nodded. Yes, and I need you to promise me something. She looked up, meeting his steady gaze. Promise me you'll never dismiss these changes, he said. Sudden shifts in vision, blurred words, seeing double, even spots of darkness, can mean the brain isn't getting what it needs. We need to pay attention every time. Rita nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking deep. I promise, she whispered. On the drive home, Rita sat quietly, staring out the window at the fading sunlight over Memphis. She thought about how fragile everything felt now, how one tiny blood vessel, smaller than a thread, could control the way she saw the world. The idea unsettled her, but there was something else beneath the fear. Clarity. She thought back to that morning, struggling to read a page she'd known by heart. It wasn't just the words blurring, it was her life, her independence, her connection to the world around her. Without her vision, how would she tend to her roses, watch Noah play in the yard, or find comfort in the small rituals that made her days feel whole. That evening, as Emily prepared dinner, Rita sat quietly at the kitchen table, holding a cup of tea between her palms. "I keep thinking," she said softly, "what if I hadn't noticed it today? What if I'd ignored it like before?" Emily set down the wooden spoon and took her mother's hand gently. "Then maybe you wouldn't be sitting here now," she whispered, her voice breaking. Rita let the words settle, feeling both the weight of them and the strange gratitude beneath. Every blurred letter, every moment of dizziness, every tremor, they weren't just warnings, they were second chances. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Rita stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair slowly. She looked closely at her reflection, noticing the faint droop on her smile, the slight redness in her tired eyes, and the quiet strength that hadn't been there weeks ago. She whispered softly to herself, "I'm listening now." For the first time since this journey began, she didn't feel powerless. She didn't feel like a victim of her body's betrayals. She felt aware, present, ready to respond. And that more than anything gave her hope. The following Saturday began like any other. The Memphis sky was bright, sunlight spilling through the curtains as Rita stepped into her garden barefoot, the grass cool beneath her feet. She breathed in the faint sweetness of the magnolia trees, letting the morning stillness wash over her. After weeks of constant doctor visits and endless worry, she longed for a few quiet minutes to feel normal again. But as she bent to water her rose bushes, the world suddenly tilted. It started with a light spinning sensation, like stepping off a carousel. Then, within seconds, the dizziness deepened. The garden blurred, colors melting into each other, and Rita instinctively reached for the wooden fence, her fingers scraping against the rough edges as she tried to steady herself. Her breath caught. Not again. She stood frozen, gripping the fence with both hands, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The dizziness refused to fade. Each movement made the world sway harder, as though the ground itself had turned against her. "Mom!" Emily's voice carried from the back door. "Are you okay?" Rita tried to answer but couldn't find her voice. She waved weakly, signaling for help, and Emily came running. By the time Emily reached her, Rita's legs trembled, refusing to hold her weight. Emily slipped an arm around her waist, half carrying her back toward the porch. "Sit down," Emily said firmly, lowering her onto the wooden step. Her voice shook, but her hands were steady, brushing sweat from her mother's forehead. "Mom, look at me. What's happening?" "I don't know," Rita whispered, her voice barely audible. "It feels like the world's spinning." Emily's fear sharpened instantly. Dr. Mason's words echoed in her mind. Sudden dizziness or loss of balance can mean your brain isn't getting what it needs. She didn't hesitate this time. "Mom, we're going to the ER, right now." Rita shook her head weakly, instinctively resisting. "Emily, please, not again. I'm tired." Emily cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet her eyes. "Mom," she said softly, voice trembling but firm. "You promised. No ignoring, remember?" Something in Emily's gaze cut through Rita's hesitation. Slowly, she nodded. At the hospital, the nurses moved quickly, checking her vitals and guiding her onto a gurney. The fluorescent lights overhead blurred into pale streaks as Rita tried to focus, her hands clutching the edge of the bed. She felt small beneath the weight of it all. The dizziness, the tests, the machines, the growing awareness that her body was speaking louder now than ever before. Dr. Mason appeared minutes later, his calm presence immediately grounding her. He leaned close, lowering his voice as though speaking only to her. "Rita," he said gently, "I know this is frightening. Sudden dizziness can happen when certain parts of the brain aren't getting steady blood flow. Sometimes it's temporary, but sometimes it's the first sign of something bigger. You did the right thing coming here." Rita swallowed hard, her throat dry. "So this could be another warning?" He nodded softly. "Exactly. And today, you listened." Emily sat nearby, clutching her mother's hand, tears glimmering in her eyes but refusing to fall. She tried to smile, but her voice cracked when she whispered, "I don't want to lose you, Mom." Rita turned her hand over, squeezing Emily's fingers with all the strength she had left. "You won't," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not if I can help it." After several hours and more scans, Dr. Mason returned with news. No major stroke, no permanent damage, but another mini-stroke warning, what he called a transient ischemic episode. The dizziness, the tremors, the blurred vision, the slurred words, they were all pieces of the same puzzle, each one a sign she couldn't afford to dismiss again. That night, back home, Rita sat on the edge of her bed, the lamplight soft on her face. Emily lingered in the doorway, watching her quietly. "Mom," she said gently, "this has to change, doesn't it?" Rita nodded, eyes fixed on her folded hands. "I can't pretend I'm invincible anymore," she admitted softly. "I thought slowing down meant weakness, but now I see slowing down might be what keeps me alive." Emily crossed the room, sitting beside her, resting her head on Rita's shoulder. "We'll do it together," she whispered. Rita smiled faintly, leaning into her daughter's warmth. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about hospitals or test results or even her fear. She was thinking about Noah's laugh, her roses blooming in the sun, the sound of Emily's voice. She was thinking about all the little pieces of life she wasn't ready to lose. And for the first time, she realized something profound. Her body hadn't been betraying her. It had been protecting her all along, whispering, nudging, warning her to pay attention. Every dizzy spell, every blurred word, every trembling hand, each one had been a lifeline, not a sentence. From that night forward, Rita made herself a promise, not just to listen, but to live more gently, more carefully, more deliberately. Because sometimes surviving isn't about strength, it's about awareness. And awareness, she thought as she drifted to sleep, is what keeps us here. The following Monday began quietly. Rita woke before sunrise, the Memphis air still heavy with summer heat, and sat by her bedroom window holding her usual cup of chamomile tea. For the first time in weeks, she felt a little steadier. No dizziness, no blurred words, no trembling hands. She let herself breathe, savoring the calm, almost convincing herself the worst was behind her. But by mid-morning, everything changed. It started as a small, sharp sting behind her right eye, sudden but bearable. She pressed her fingers gently to her temple, expecting it to fade, but within minutes, the pain grew, spreading like wildfire through her head. It was unlike any headache she'd ever experienced, piercing, relentless, unforgiving. The kind of pain that makes you stop in your tracks and know deep down something isn't right. She tried to stand, but the room tilted slightly, and her breath came shallow. Beads of sweat gathered on her forehead, and she gripped the edge of the table for balance. Emily, who was folding laundry in the living room, heard the mug shatter on the floor and rushed in immediately. "Mom, what happened?" Rita tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "My head, Emily, my head hurts so bad." Emily froze for a moment, fear flooding her face, then snapped into action. "Sit down. No, lie down. Don't move. I'm calling Dr. Mason." Within minutes, Emily was on the phone, her voice urgent, shaky. Rita heard only fragments. Sudden headache, right side, different from normal. She closed her eyes, pressing a trembling hand against her temple, praying silently for the pain to ease. But it didn't. It built in waves, sharp and blinding, like her head was caught in a vice. Dr. Mason called back almost immediately. Emily put him on speaker, her hands trembling slightly as she held the phone. "Emily," his calm voice came through, steady and low, "listen to me carefully. If your mom says this is the worst headache she's ever had, you don't wait. Call 911 right now." Emily's chest tightened. "It's that serious?" "Yes," he said firmly. "This could be a cerebral hemorrhage, a bleeding inside the brain. Time is everything." Within minutes, the paramedics arrived again, moving quickly but gently as they checked Rita's vitals and helped her onto the stretcher. Rita tried to focus on Emily's hand, holding hers tightly, grounding her in the chaos around them. She could hear muffled instructions, the soft buzz of the blood pressure cuff, and the quiet reassurance of one paramedic saying, "We've got you, ma'am, you're safe." The ride to the hospital felt endless, the siren a distant hum beneath the pounding in her head. Rita tried to keep her eyes open, but the pain made the edges of her vision blur. She whispered softly to Emily, who rode beside her, "Don't be scared, sweetheart." Emily gripped her mother's hand harder, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "I'm not scared," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm here." At the hospital, Dr. Mason was waiting when they arrived. He guided them quickly into an emergency room, his presence calm yet urgent. He explained everything softly to Rita while the nurses prepared for scans. "Rita, this kind of sudden, severe headache isn't just pain, it's your brain telling us something important," he said gently. "It could mean bleeding or increased pressure. We need to find out fast." Rita nodded faintly, her lips pale, her breathing shallow. Emily sat beside her, stroking her hand while the machines beeped steadily in the background. Minutes later, the results came back. Relief washed over Dr. Mason's face as he explained, "No bleeding, that's the good news, but what you experienced was a warning, a sudden surge in blood pressure that could have triggered something much worse if we'd waited." Rita let out a shaky breath, tears spilling quietly onto her cheeks. "So I came in time?" "Yes," Dr. Mason said softly, his hand resting gently on hers. "Because you didn't wait." Emily leaned forward, resting her forehead against her mother's hand, the tension in her shoulders finally breaking. "I'm so glad you called me," she whispered. Later that evening, back in the quiet of her hospital room, Rita lay awake, staring at the faint shadows dancing across the ceiling. The painkillers had dulled the sharp edge of the headache, but her thoughts were restless. She thought about how easily she might have brushed this off, blaming it on stress or the heat, like so many women her age do. She thought about the moments she'd almost ignored, the tremor, the dizziness, the blurred vision, and how each one had been a soft knock, growing louder each time. Emily sat beside her bed, scrolling quietly through her phone, glancing up now and then to check on her mother. "You scared me today, Mom," she whispered softly. Rita reached over, squeezing her daughter's hand with what little strength she had left. "I scared myself," she admitted, "but I'm listening now, Emily. I promise." For the first time since this journey began, Rita understood just how fragile the line between warning and danger really was. And as she drifted into a light, healing sleep, she made herself another promise. Never again would she silence her body's alarms, because sometimes the difference between survival and tragedy is one decision, one call made just in time. A week after the severe headache scare, Rita was back home, resting in her little Memphis bungalow. The late summer heat hung heavy in the air, and the magnolia trees outside her window swayed lazily in the breeze. For the first time in days, she thought maybe life would feel normal again. But by Wednesday, something felt off. It wasn't pain this time, it wasn't dizziness or blurred vision, it was exhaustion, a deep, bone-heavy weariness that wrapped around her like a weight she couldn't shake. Rita had always been active. Even after retiring from teaching, she tended to her rose garden, walked around the block every morning, and spent afternoons playing on the porch with Noah. But that morning, just walking from the bedroom to the kitchen left her short of breath. She leaned against the counter, gripping the cool edge for balance, trying to steady herself. Emily noticed immediately. "Mom, you okay? You look pale." Rita forced a small smile. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. Didn't sleep well, that's all." But she knew that wasn't true. She'd slept almost 9 hours the night before, and still her limbs felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish, as though every step was a mountain. Later that afternoon, she tried reading again, but her eyelids drooped after just a few pages. She lay on the couch, telling herself a quick nap would help, but when she woke, 2 hours had passed, and she still felt like she hadn't rested at all. Emily brought her a glass of water, sitting beside her quietly. "Mom," she said gently, "you're doing everything right, eating well, resting, taking your meds, but you still look exhausted. Something's not adding up." Rita sighed, staring at the ceiling. "I feel like my body's slowing down faster than I can keep up." Emily hesitated, her brow furrowed. "Do you think this could be related to everything else?" Neither of them wanted to say the word, but it hung unspoken between them. Stroke. That evening, Emily insisted they called Dr. Mason again. He listened carefully as Rita described her overwhelming fatigue, asking questions about her sleep, diet, and medications. Then his tone softened, carrying a weight of reassurance but also caution. "Rita," he said gently, "I know this feels frustrating, but extreme, unexplained tiredness, especially when it comes suddenly, can sometimes be part of what we've been watching. It's the body's way of saying the brain isn't getting all the oxygen and nutrients it needs. It doesn't always come with pain or obvious symptoms. Sometimes it's just this." Rita pressed the phone closer, frowning slightly. "But I don't feel sick." "I know," he replied softly. "That's what makes it so tricky. Fatigue like this can be one of the quietest signals, and most people ignore it." She stayed silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. A quiet part of her wanted to dismiss it, to believe she just needed more rest, maybe better sleep. But another part, the part that had sat in the back of ambulances and hospital rooms these past few weeks, knew better now. Dr. Mason recommended coming in the next morning for additional tests, just to be safe. Emily hung up the phone and turned to her mother, taking her hand gently. "We're not risking it, okay?" Rita nodded, too tired to argue. That night, she lay awake long after Emily had gone to bed, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp outside her window. Her thoughts wandered through the past few months, the trembling hand, the blurred words, the dizziness, the blinding headache, each moment stacking gently on the next, forming a picture she hadn't wanted to see. She thought about how she'd always equated tiredness with aging, how many of her friends joked about slowing down as part of life. But this felt different. This wasn't just her body growing older, it was her body pleading softly for attention. The next day, at Dr. Mason's office, he ran a few quick checks and reassured her again, speaking with the same warmth he always carried. "The good news is, we're catching these signs before they do lasting harm," he explained, patting her hand. "That's why awareness matters so much, Rita. The more we listen, the better we can protect what matters most." Rita smiled faintly, her eyes damp but steady. "I used to think being strong meant pushing through, but now I see strength is knowing when to slow down." Emily squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's not weakness, Mom. That's wisdom." That night, back home, Rita curled up on the couch with Noah, his little head resting on her arm as he babbled about school. She studied his face, soft and full of life, and felt something shift quietly inside her. She didn't feel defeated anymore. She didn't feel fragile. She felt aware of how her body spoke, of how each whisper mattered, and of how many moments, like this one, she wanted to protect. And for the first time, she didn't see her fatigue as an inconvenience. She saw it as a message she was finally ready to hear. It was a quiet Friday morning when Rita and Emily sat together in Dr. Mason's office for a follow-up visit. The blinds were half drawn, letting soft streams of Memphis sunlight fall across the desk. Outside, the sounds of traffic hummed faintly, but in the room, everything felt still. Rita sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture small but steady. She felt calmer than she had in weeks, but a lingering unease stayed beneath the surface. There was something Dr. Mason had hinted at during her last visit, something about unique risks for women. And now she was ready to ask. "Dr. Mason," she began softly, "you keep saying women's strokes can be different. What did you mean by that?" Dr. Mason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, his expression thoughtful but kind. "I'm glad you asked, Rita," he said gently. "You see, many people assume stroke looks the same for everyone. But that's not always true. Women can face unique risks that often go unnoticed and unspoken." Emily shifted in her chair, listening intently. Dr. Mason continued, his tone warm and conversational, as though he were talking to family at the dinner table. "For example, hormonal changes, things like birth control pills, pregnancy, and menopause, can affect how blood flows and how the body regulates pressure. These aren't problems for every woman, but for some, they add an extra layer of vulnerability." Rita blinked, surprised. I never knew that. No one ever told me." He nodded, his voice soft. "That's the thing, Rita. People don't talk about it enough. Many women don't realize that migraines, especially those linked to hormonal shifts, can sometimes increase stroke risk too. And for some, things like hormone replacement therapy after menopause can have an impact as well." Emily frowned, leaning closer. "But why isn't this common knowledge?" Dr. Mason sighed, glancing briefly at his folded hands before meeting their eyes again. "Because most of the research and education for decades focused on men. Women's symptoms, women's risks, they were treated as secondary, and that silence has cost lives." The room went quiet for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Rita stared at her hands, feeling the faint tremor she'd grown used to over the past few weeks. She thought back to the day she first felt her fingers slip, the day she'd brushed it off, and an ache of frustration settled in her chest. "All this time," she whispered almost to herself, "I thought I was safe because I ate well, stayed active, kept my blood pressure under control. I never thought about this." Dr. Mason reached across the desk, resting his hand lightly on hers, his voice carrying both reassurance and quiet urgency. "You've done so much right, Rita, and that matters. But awareness matters too, especially for women. The signs can be quieter, subtler, a faint smile droop, sudden fatigue, slight confusion. All those small moments add up. Knowing your unique risks gives you the power to act sooner." Emily sat back in her chair, exhaling softly, as though absorbing a truth she hadn't realized she needed to hear. Rita, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of emotions. Frustration, yes, but also relief. Relief that she finally understood why her symptoms had seemed so unpredictable, why nothing fit the textbook descriptions she'd once read online. After the appointment, they stopped by a small cafe near the clinic. Emily stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, glancing up at her mother. "You okay?" Rita nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "I'm okay," she said softly. "But I'm angry too. Angry that no one talks about this. How many women like me just don't know?" Emily reached across the table, squeezing her hand gently. "But now you do. And maybe we can help other women know too." Rita smiled faintly, the corners of her lips softening. "Maybe that's the point," she murmured. "Maybe all of this, the headaches, the dizziness, the fear, maybe it's meant to make me pay attention, not just for me, but for everyone like me." Later that evening, sitting on her porch with the cicadas humming softly in the distance, Rita replayed Dr. Mason's words in her mind. It wasn't just about reacting to symptoms anymore. It was about understanding herself, her body, her risks, her story. And for the first time, she realized something important. She wasn't powerless, because now she knew what no one had ever told her. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Rita sat on her porch, the warm Memphis sun spilling across the wooden steps. She cradled a cup of chamomile tea in her hands, its steam curling gently into the air. The cicadas hummed softly in the distance, and Noah's laughter floated faintly from the yard where he chased a paper plane. For the first time in months, Rita felt present. She wasn't replaying the ambulance rides or the panic of blurred words. She wasn't haunted by the crushing headache or the spinning dizziness. She was here, breathing slowly, holding on to a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. Emily joined her on the porch, carrying 2 slices of toast. She handed one to her mother before sitting beside her, the wooden step creaking gently under her weight. For a while, neither spoke. They just watched the morning unfold together. Then Emily broke the silence, her voice soft. "You seem lighter today, Mom." Rita smiled faintly, tracing the rim of her teacup with her finger. "I am," she said, almost in surprise. "For the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm fighting my body. I feel like I'm listening to it." Emily studied her for a moment, her expression tender but serious. "You scared me, you know. Every time I think about how close we came." Her voice faltered and she shook her head, swallowing back the rest of the thought. Rita reached over, taking her daughter's hand in hers. "I scared myself too," she admitted softly. "But maybe that's what it took to open my eyes." Dr. Mason had told her something during their last appointment that stuck with her. The difference between a warning and a tragedy is often just time and whether we act fast enough. And now, sitting on that porch, Rita understood it in her bones. It wasn't the strength to push through the pain that saved her. It was the courage to pay attention, to listen when her body whispered, and to act before it screamed. Later that afternoon, Rita and Emily attended a small community gathering at the local wellness center. Dr. Mason had invited them. He was giving a talk on stroke awareness, hoping to reach more women in their neighborhood. At first, Rita hesitated. She didn't want to relive her fear, but something inside her knew she needed to be there. The room was filled with women around her age, their faces open and curious, some anxious, some tired. Dr. Mason stood at the front, his voice calm and steady, weaving stories instead of lectures. He spoke about subtle symptoms, a smile drooping, a word slurred, a sudden wave of exhaustion, and the way so many women brushed them off, thinking they were harmless. Then, without warning, he paused and gestured toward Rita in the audience. "I want to share someone's story," he said gently, looking directly at her. Rita's breath caught, but she nodded when he asked if he could continue. "She came to me after weeks of small, quiet changes, tremors, blurred vision, dizziness, all things many people dismiss, but she chose to act, and because she did, she's here today, and I want every woman in this room to hear this. The earlier you respond, the greater your chance to recover fully." The room was silent for a long moment. Then one woman in the back raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly as she asked, "But what if we're wrong? What if it's nothing?" Dr. Mason smiled softly. "Then you'll have peace of mind, but if it is something, acting fast can save your life, and that's a chance worth taking every time." Rita felt Emily's hand squeeze hers under the table, and something in her chest shifted, a quiet pride she hadn't expected. She realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever ignored her body's whispers, every mother, sister, or friend who thought she was just tired or just clumsy. After the gathering, several women came up to her, sharing their own stories, their fears, their strange little symptoms they'd never told anyone about. Some hugged her tightly, their voices soft with gratitude. Driving home, Emily glanced over at her mother. "You know," she said, "you probably saved someone's life today." Rita turned her head, watching the Memphis skyline blur past the car window. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe we saved each other." That evening, back on her porch, Rita watched the sky turn shades of amber and violet. She thought about all the moments she'd almost dismissed, the trembling hand, the blurred words, the exhaustion, the piercing headache. She thought about how close she'd come to losing her independence, her garden, her mornings with Noah, her laughter-filled afternoons with Emily. But she also thought about everything she'd gained, clarity, awareness, and a new reverence for the fragile beauty of her own life. She took a deep breath, letting the warm summer air fill her lungs, and whispered to herself, "I'm listening, always." Because now she knew the truth, the one Dr. Mason had repeated so many times. Early detection doesn't just save lives, it saves moments. Moments like Noah's laughter in the yard, moments like Emily's quiet smile on the porch. Rita's story began with whispers, a trembling hand, a slurred word, a fleeting wave of dizziness she almost ignored. Like so many women, she believed strength meant pushing through, telling herself she was just tired or just clumsy. But through each frightening moment, the blurred vision, the sudden weakness, the piercing headache, she discovered something life-changing. Strength isn't about enduring silently. It's about listening. It's about acting when your body speaks, even when the signs feel small. Because of that shift, Rita reclaimed more than her health. She reclaimed her mornings on the porch, her laughter with Emily, and the little joys she thought she might lose. Her journey reminds us that awareness isn't fear, it's power. So if you felt unexplained exhaustion, sudden dizziness, confusion, or any subtle change you can't explain, pause. Listen, don't dismiss it as nothing. The smallest signs can carry the loudest messages, and early action can change everything. You deserve the chance to protect your independence, your memories, and the moments that make life full. And sometimes, that chance begins with simply paying attention. Today, not tomorrow. Take Rita's promise and make it your own. I'm listening now, because your body's whispers matter. Your life matters. And the moments waiting ahead, mornings in the garden, laughter with family, quiet sunsets, are worth protecting. Stay aware, stay gentle with yourself. And remember, acting early doesn't just save lives, it saves the beautiful moments that make life worth living. Rita never imagined her life would change with something as small as a trembling hand and a slight slur in her speech. At 66, living quietly in Memphis, she thought strokes were sudden, obvious events, something she'd surely recognize if it happened to her. But what she didn't know was how silent and subtle the early warning signs can be, especially for women. This video follows Rita's journey, from the first missed symptoms to the frightening moments that almost cost her everything. Through her story, you'll see how early detection, quiet awareness, and listening to your body can make all the difference. If you've ever brushed off unexplained dizziness, fatigue, blurred vision, or confusion, Rita's experience is a gentle reminder. Sometimes the smallest signs speak the loudest. Awareness can protect your independence, your loved ones, and the moments that make life beautiful. Don't wait until it's too late. Learn to recognize what your body is trying to tell you. And if you find this video meaningful, share it with someone you care about. It could change, even save a life. Stroke warning signs, senior health tips, women's health over 60, healthy aging, stroke prevention, listen to your body, natural health, awareness GIM. Have you or someone you love ever experienced subtle stroke symptoms like sudden dizziness, blurred vision, or slurred speech, and brushed them off as nothing? Your story could help someone else recognize the signs early and protect their health. Share your experience below. Let's support and learn from each other. Thumbnails. Most women miss these 7 warning signs. Neurologist says check now.